Pete Buttigieg is the 19th Secretary of Transportation. He tweets at Secretary Pete. Here with a big supply chain announcement. It's called Flow. Hi, Mr. Secretary. Welcome back.
Good morning. Good to be with you again.
Yeah. So a big announcement today. Do tell.
That's right. So we have an announcement today launching a program at the White House with 18 private sector companies involved in supply chains to create a new initiative called Flow. And the idea here is data sharing that will improve supply chains, help goods move more smoothly, and ultimately lower costs for consumers. As you know, we've been working these supply chain issues really throughout this administration. We've been doing a lot on the infrastructure side, in investments in ports, moving them to 24/7 operations. But one of the things we've learned again and again talking to companies and players across the supply chains is there's a lack of data. There's simple data that you would assume everybody has, like the ability of, let's say, a company like Target to know exactly when and where its products are on containers. But because there are so many different players involved in shipping, that data is actually not always shared. We're working to change that, and as we do, we think it's going to make a big difference in the efficiency of moving goods in this country.
Wow, that's so interesting. So just to back up a little bit, what is the status of the supply chain in this country? Has it improved?
So we have seen improvements. If you look at measures like the cost of shipping, the spot rates for shipping over the ocean, still high, but they've come off of their peaks. Same thing on some of the things we're measuring, like how many empty containers are building up in our ports, or how many containers sit there for more than a week. All of those are improving, but we've got a long way to go, which is why we're continuing to introduce new efforts to help. Look, we're going to keep seeing pressures on our supply chain. We got demand through the roof. We got continuing effects from COVID and the pandemic, especially in Asia, as you look at some of these new feared factory shutdowns. Obviously, when you have an event like a war overseas, that can affect supply chains. So all the more reason for us to continue working on the things that are under our control and bring people together, like all of the private companies that we're bringing to the table at the White House today, to talk about how we can share data and make more progress here.
So this is a program that the White House is facilitating, but what are the mechanics of it, Mr. Secretary? Is there going to be like a database, or does this like fall under a particular agency?
Yeah, ultimately what you'll get is a digital tool, probably in the form of a website. But the intent is not for this to be a large kind of government-owned and operated tool. We're facilitating this, but it's really going to come down to the private sector players sharing. Now, look, a lot of companies are used to holding tight onto their data, but this is not proprietary data, trade secrets, things you wouldn't want to share. This is information like what's the last day that you can turn a container around and still have it on a ship if you're exporting something. What's the warehouse capacity so that a truck driver knows when they can arrive at a warehouse and actually be able to pick something up or drop something off? When are the containers ready at the port? I mean, again, we have a lot of truck drivers who get stuck waiting for hours because they're not actually ready for them at the port to get the specific container that they're there to pick up. So data like this is just spread out across a lot of different players, because you have the port itself, you got terminal operators, you got the companies that actually own the cargo, the Targets, the Walmarts, you got shippers, and everybody in between. This is about bringing them all together, and it's voluntary. So basically, you contribute data in order to get access to the data that everybody else is contributing. And through that, we think we're going to have much smoother operations.
Well, it's very interesting who's participating: a bunch of ports, a bunch of carriers, terminal operators, and then a whole bunch of businesses and trucking companies.
That's right. One of the things we've been pointing out really from the beginning of these supply chain issues is that, our supply chains are mostly private sector, as they ought to be. I don't think most people want the federal government to be owning and operating, shipping, warehouses, and ports in this country. But what it means is you really need to engage these private sector players. So we're going to be sitting down today at the White House with, the shippers and the ports, FedEx, UPS, but also folks like True Value Hardware and Land O'Lakes, Target. These players who have a lot on the line. They own a lot of this cargo, and they need some of this visibility too, and can bring a lot of data to the table. So it's a private sector partnership facilitated by public sector leadership at the White House. And I think that's really how this public-private balance needs to work when it comes to things like improving our supply chain so that goods move more quickly. And look, a lot of this in this season of continued inflation is about costs, because when we have smoother supply chains, that eases shipping costs, and ultimately it eases the cost you're going to see when you go to Target or True Value to pick something up.
Well, a lot of this plan seems focused on shipping, which makes me wonder, is shipping like a key bottleneck in the supply chain? Because for a while we were focused on trucking, but has it come down to shipping now?
The truth is there's no one piece of it. It's a classic example of only being as strong as your weakest link. So, with shipping, we got a lot of volume, although we're continuing to see backups. Trucking does continue to be an issue. We need more people to stay in that career, and we need to support truck drivers with things like adequate parking and making sure their compensation is strong. But again, sometimes the weak link is actually the warehouse, and the backup at the warehouse is the reason that a trucker might get so frustrated that they start looking for a different job. All of these things are connected, almost by definition. That's how it is with supply chains, and that's why we're working every angle of the problem that we can.
While you're here, how's the big infrastructure spending going?
We are underway. We just released a new wave of funding for buses and bus facilities. We've got announcements coming up on a number of other areas, and we've already put more than $50 billion out there, mostly for road and highway improvements and bridges. So we're definitely not letting a moment go to waste, and seeing a lot of enthusiasm and excitement in local government about how they can put this to work. I spoke to the National League of Cities yesterday. The president was there too. A lot of mayors and council members anxious to put these dollars to work in their communities. Was with America's public transit agencies also yesterday. They're looking at how they can use these dollars to do everything from getting cleaner, quieter running buses to making sure that their subway systems can run more frequently or more efficiently in the big cities. So tons of work going on, exactly as we'd hoped, but lots of work still ahead of us. I mean, these are the very early stages of lining up these dollars and putting them to work.
Well, I think it's very interesting for you as a former mayor to be addressing the League of Cities, and I wonder what your message was to them.
Yeah, I do still, in fact, a lot of folks there still call me mayor, and I take that as a compliment. And, it reminds me of my experience being a mayor of a city that was not the biggest city, knocking on the door of federal agencies like the one I'm in charge of now, trying to get answers. And so the biggest thing is it's really motivated me to try to make this process user-friendly. A lot of the places that will benefit the most from this bill, they're smaller communities, they're rural communities, and we got to help them navigate these federal processes. It can be really challenging to figure out how to apply for a grant, and if you get that grant, that could be game-changing for your community. But the paperwork, the complexity, the processes, that's what I'm trying to make a little simpler, a little easier, because I remember what it was like sitting in that chair trying to get federal help.
Yeah, that's a frustration for so many city officials. I mean, and it must be a little bit frustrating when you arrive in federal government and see how complicated it truly is from the other side as well.
Yeah, and look, these things got complicated for a reason. A lot of it's wanting to make sure that taxpayer dollars are well spent, which means there's a lot of reporting and a lot of accountability. That's not a bad thing, but it can get so complicated that we get in our own way. So one of the things we're doing with the dozens of new programs that have been created on everything from culverts to help water move more efficiently to big bridge rehabilitation, we're trying to look for ways to combine some of the processes. Like we just took two of our big bus programs, combined them into one. The way you could think of it is kind of like a common application if you've ever prepared that for college. Instead of having to fill in your zip code 7 different times on 7 different forms, you do it once. We're trying to do that in our grant processes so that communities find it a little bit easier to work with us. These efficiencies really add up, and I think they're going to be especially important if we want these dollars to go where they're needed most, which is often not a community that has dozens of people on payroll able to master the complexities of the federal government. They're just folks trying to figure out how to deliver services and looking for a little help.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Find him on Twitter at Secretary Pete. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Great being with you again.
Have a great day.